And joining me now from Los Angeles is Saul Rubinek. Welcome to the CJN Daily.
Hi.
Hi, it's great to meet you. And joining me as well is Csillag, my colleague at the CJN. And we're going to start by congratulating you on your upcoming gig in Ottawa. But before we get into it, it was supposed to be an in-person thing, and maybe there was a meet and greet. So how is that all going to work out now with COVID? Are you actually coming?
No, this is the event, the commemoration for Kristallnacht on November 9th, which I think is happening your time around 7 o'clock in the evening, is a number of people speaking. I'll be reading excerpts from a new play that I've written about my relationship with my parents and my daughter that has to do with my parents' survival of the Holocaust and me making a documentary film, writing a book about that. But I would have loved to have done it in person, but it's a bit dangerous to do that. And there was going to be a meet and greet to do with that. A meet and greet on Zoom is not the same thing. So I believe the Holocaust Education Society, CHESS, as it's called in Ottawa, is sponsoring that event in the spring. We're not sure of the dates yet, and those details will probably be on their website. Probably, my guess is it would happen late April, but it's still to be determined. And that's when I would very much like to go to Ottawa and meet people. I actually won't be far away at that point. I'll be in Toronto working, so it's only a nice train trip, which I love to do.
Are you going to be able to say what you're working on before I turn it over to Ron?
Oh, no, not yet, no.
Okay, maybe they're bringing back Schitt's Creek, season 6, episode 10. Okay, Ron, go ahead.
Saul's good. Okay, Saul, tell us, please, how the event in Ottawa came about. Bring us, provide a genesis, if you don't mind. Did you approach them? Did they approach you? How did it all happen?
Bernie Farber Bernie Farber, who is was the president of the Canadian Jewish Congress, is somebody I met when I was 8. He was probably 6 or 5 or something, and in Ottawa, and he's such an old friend. And his brother Stan is on the board of the Holocaust Education charity at Carleton University. It comes out of Carleton University, I think. And I think it was an idea that they had, since I'm originally from Ottawa, more or less originally from Ottawa. I moved to Ottawa when I was 6.5 years old from Montreal with my parents. But they had the idea, and they approached me, and I thought it was a very interesting idea, except I wasn't sure where COVID would be at that point. But I was really open to it, especially since I really was looking for a way to talk about this new play I'd written. And I thought, and Bernie had read my new play, or at least an early draft of it, and he thought, this may be interesting for you. It's very connected, what you're writing about. What I'm writing about is how writing a book about my parents, which I started doing when I was in my 20s. It took about 10 years of interviewing my mom and dad about their experiences before, during, and after the war in Poland and in the refugee camp where I was born. That took about 10 years, and then once it was published, right around the same time, I went together with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, and I both financed a very small crew going to Poland in the last year and a half of communist regime in Poland, 1986, summer of 86. And then the book came out right as the documentary came out at the Toronto Film Festival in the fall of 87. And so that experience, how writing the book, making the documentary film, all of which happened before I had children. My daughter was born in 91, and my son wasn't born until 95. And eventually introducing them to the subject was a major part of my life. When to introduce children to the subject, how to introduce children to the subject became a major part of my life. And I was really interested dramatically in how to present how 3 generations of my family was affected ultimately by my delving into my parents' experiences, my own experiences, my children's experiences, with my investigation into their survival. And very particular and a very unique story, as all stories of survival are. And I guess, and I hoped, if well told, then would become universal stories. I don't want to exclusivize the Holocaust experience. It is already a unique experience. It was a particular genocide with its own particular roots and its own mechanisms and its own reasons. But there probably hasn't been a day on the planet where there hasn't been some kind of genocide. And I'm interested in joining hands with other people who have dealt with this, with trauma. My story is really about how I had to deal with my parents. This, I think, that other people will relate to my story.
And you've already answered partially my next question, which was, so many miracles came out in 1987. I was going to ask you about the time lag between that and All in the Telling, but you seem to have alluded to the answer, which is the answer is your children, and how to deal with this story, how to bring them into the story. Talk to us a little bit about how you did it, because it's a mystery to a lot of second generation, is how do you tell the next generation without passing on, stories that may upset people, or what constitutes upset. How did you do it? And it's safe to say, I guess, they were the spark that drove you to do this, to do All in the Telling. Is that correct?
I'm not I don't proselytize about how people should raise their children, or what they should tell their children, or how they should tell their children. In my particular case, my wife Eleanor and I, Eleanor's background is Celtic, Scottish, English background. My children are Celtic, Scottish, Jewish, Polish, and what have you. On both sides of their history is very important in their education. I grew up like a lot of Jewish kids, I think, not remembering a time when I didn't know about the Holocaust. I had to think, and we had to discuss, Eleanor and I, when Hannah was born. It came up when school started. When are we going to introduce her to the subject? I wasn't thrilled with the fact that I knew this information. There's nothing much I could do about it. I grew up with parents who had nightmares, who I used to think that every kid, not just Jewish kid, every kid, parents had nightmares, and the little kid would go into the parents' bedroom to find out if everything was okay. It wasn't until I had a first sleepover that I found out that was my house, I suspect that if you're a person of color, or if you're a First Nations person or Indigenous person, there's nothing much you can do about when you're going to find out about systemic or structural racism in the society that you're in. You're born into it, and you're born into it in a particular way. Jews are white in so to speak, in a very small sliver of time. Mostly we've been marginalized throughout our history as Jews and persecuted wherever we were. There are slivers of time throughout history in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, all over the world, where we've been accepted and part of the society, only to find out, whether it was 10 years later or 50 years later, that we were no longer welcome and we were no longer white, so to speak. I use the word white to me, a member of the establishment. Perhaps an improper way of using the word. But in any case, I think that I was told too early, and I certainly believed that I wasn't going to try to tell my daughter about genocide before, and Eleanor and I agreed, and the school agreed that we were with, that we would try to introduce this subject to her at a different age. And we all thought that the age 13 made sense. It's a time when we thought, in terms of the education, in terms of the understanding of the development of the child, That's when they can begin to contextualize cause and effect. And why introduce this subject of this dark side of humanity so early? What would be the point of it? Now, people disagree with this. They want to raise their children the way they want to. I'm telling you about me and Eleanor and what we did. So my daughter was not introduced to this subject and didn't even know the word genocide until she was 13, when I showed her the documentary. First showed her the book I'd written about my parents, which had been written 4 years before she was born. So this was, now 17 years later. And she was 13. And then we introduced it. I was asked by the school to introduce it to the classroom, and of her very mixed classroom. And I said I would only do that if it wasn't Holocaust education. Again, I was less interested in particularizing. I'm not an historian. And the school and Eleanor and I agreed that the way to do it was to show this documentary. And by the way, the documentary, since my parents the documentary is me bringing my parents back to Poland in order to have a reunion with the Polish farmers that had hidden them for 2.5 years. So they survived together, they were in love. The documentary is an hour long. It's mostly about how this extraordinary Polish woman and her son helped save my parents' lives. There's no concentration camps in it. And it's not a bad way to introduce 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds to this subject, because at the root of it is not the dark heart of evil, although of course that's a part of it, they're being hunted. But it's also about this great act of courage of this Polish Catholic farmer, farmer's wife, who wanted to save them. So that was a way for me and Eleanor and Hannah too, who had to agree to it, for us to, and the school, to begin to inspire the children for a week of their own family history investigation, so that they could, after a week, begin to ask questions of their grandmother. Why are they in LA? How did their parents meet? My point of view was and is that if you investigate your own background, you will find, if you ask the right questions to the right people, you'll find you have a Tolstoy novel there. You have murder, you have suicide, you have acts of extraordinary bravery, you have amazing coincidence, even miracles. You have betrayal, grand love affairs in your own background. It's probably impossible that you don't. In your own background, are you lucky enough to be able to ask the right people the right questions? Anyway, it doesn't have to be done that way. We only had a week at that point. Write a little song, do a little iPhone video, share. The whole purpose of it is not just to investigate, but to share it with your class. It was an extraordinary thing to witness. Children who are 13, 14 years old after a week bring to their classroom stuff that they hadn't known before and sharing it with others. There was an amazing thing innocently said by one 14-year-old girl in the classroom at the end of the week. She said, and she had just learned the word genocide and what it meant. And she said, but if everyone told stories like this, wouldn't genocide be impossible? It was a very moving question, an innocent question, and spoke of a profound truth.
I think you just said, if I heard you correctly, that you learned of the Holocaust too early. Do you mind expanding on that and maybe telling us, if it's not too personal a question, what that meant to you in your psyche?
I think that if I could do that, Ron, on a show like this, then I wouldn't have had to I wouldn't have needed to write a play. It's a deep question, and I appreciate and I respect your question. With all due respect, it took me a play to try to come to terms with that question.
So that leads me to my next question, which was, has the act of telling been cathartic for you?
I don't know. No, it's not yet. It's a play. It's not in the act of writing is partially cathartic, but it's a play, it's a blueprint. It needs to be performed and produced. It needs an audience. You're asking a question, it's a very interesting question, because you're asking what I got out of it. Whereas the real verb that's important is give. The verb that's intrinsic to what I hope I'm doing is not so much what am I getting out of it, but what do I have to give? And the thing is that I have to give is, at the moment, it's for actors and a director and a designer and producer and all the things that go along with creating a play. And then that's given to an audience that then assists in making it a meaningful experience. That act itself is the full circle. At that point, I think there'll be some catharsis.
How much of the play will you be revealing on the 9th, and what form does it take? Are you reading, or are there actual different people reciting different parts?
No. It's just me. I haven't got a lot of time. The play is a full 2-hour play. At least at the moment, it's probably even longer than that, because it needs to be workshopped and put into rehearsal. So you always write a little long. The play is complicated, and I'll explain it what it is. I don't change any names. My parents' names, my name, my daughter's name, my wife Eleanor's name. I haven't hidden anything. At least nobody's planning to sue me yet. So I'll change the names if I get a lawsuit coming at me. But I don't think my family's going to sue me. The thing is that it's all very personal, and also quite funny. You might find surprising. At least I'm hoping it's funny, as well as there's some very dark material in there. But no, I'm going to be reading some excerpts, and I probably have about a half hour with which to do that. There's an introduction. Then there'll be questions from people who are there on Zoom. So probably somewhere between a half hour and 45 minutes. And also, so there'll be a couple of clips. My play includes the clips from the actual documentary film. The characters are me and my parents and my wife and other characters that I'm going to play on this call. I'm writing now. I'm figuring out the excerpts. I'm honing in right now, so I'm not really exactly sure. But no, I'm playing all the roles, of course. And I like performing, so it'll be fun to do. It'll be a combination of reading and some stuff I'll know off by heart, It's complicated. It took about 4 years to write, off and on, with some severe writer's blocks right in the middle of it. But I finished the first draft of it just at the end of 2019, and then at the beginning of 2020, I had a workshop in my living room here with a group of actors, or at least a reading, not so much a workshop, with an invited audience. And then 3 weeks later, we were quarantined. It was February of 2020, and then by mid-March, we were stuck. So all the workshops I did were with actors on Zoom. So I had several workshops, individual scenes. I couldn't do a full reading of it. I mean, I suppose I could have on Zoom, but I didn't try. It's very difficult to do. And I have been working on the play off and on, for the last almost 2 more years, right? And I had workshops. They were all ready to go. They were financed. 2 different workshops, one in New York and one in Los Angeles, which COVID put an end to that. So what I need to do now, I have a producer for the play, and none of which, all of the details of which I can't reveal until they're solid. So the play is gathering together its financing, and I have dreams about what I would like to do. I mean, to me, I would like my hometown Ottawa I'd love it to premiere there before it toured the country. I'd love it to be in Ottawa somewhere, National Arts Center, or I don't know where, the Ottawa Little Theatre maybe. Wherever, Ottawa's a hometown to me, and where I began to be an actor, and it would mean a lot to me that it would premiere there. But that's a question of finances and all kinds of logistical things. And I would I'm ambitious for the play. I think that I would like it to, if it's successful, and I would like it to tour, but I'm especially interested in the play being done in Poland. Well, in Eastern Europe for sure, but in Poland in particular, especially since right now the Polish government is so, in my opinion, so egregiously right-wing, and have even made a law that one can't talk about Polish collaboration with the Nazis. You know, it's such an odd thing how people want to rewrite history, isn't it? I guess what I believe, I honestly believe, and I think it's partly what my play is about, it's probably a question I'm going to answer that you haven't asked. Or you are, I think it's what I would want to know if I were asking me questions. I believe that we all have in our background 4 characters to do with this subject. And these 4 characters, no matter what culture or race you're from, we have perpetrators, we have victims, we have heroes, and we have bystanders. And sometimes those personalities, maybe more often than sometimes, are within one person, within ourselves. How else do you understand monstrous behavior? It's easy to call people monsters or heroes, victims, perpetrators. These are labels that don't really tell us much. I think that the only way to really understand horrific acts perpetrated by human beings, horrific suffering suffered by human beings, extraordinary acts of bravery where people risk their lives to save others, that maybe even strangers, or the fact that people can stand by and do nothing, is if we see those characters within ourselves. I don't think change is possible unless we understand that within ourselves.
Understood.
Yeah.
The Ottawa Jewish Bulletin quoted you as saying that you're working on a 2nd edition of your book that's supposedly coming out. If we can pivot to that for a minute, can you tell us where that is?
When my daughter first read the book, she read it twice right away, and then watched the documentary with us, and then we asked her permission whether we can show it to the classroom, which had already been arranged, and then yes, we did that. And then when she graduated from college a number of years ago, she said, "Look, I think that we need a new edition of your book." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, it's not all true, is it? There are a lot of lies in there." And I said, "Well, I think they're kind of white lies, because people were alive at the time, and I had an agreement with my parents about naming names and certain things." And she said, "Well, everybody's dead who's involved in this now, and I think it's important to tell some of these truths." And she talked me into it. And she said, "I'll be your editor." And she was my editor for a number of years doing this. And so we rewrote the book together, went back to certain of the tapes, as I recall. She didn't know my father died when she was only 5 years old, and my mother died when she was 9 years old. But we worked on it together, and certain painful things had to be revealed, and they were. Then when I wrote the play, there were certain things in the play that came out that I hadn't recalled that then made their way into the book as well. So the book is a kind of combination of my daughter's work and what I'd done with the play, and I'm not even looking for a publisher for it, frankly, because I think it would I won't get it published. It's a book about the Holocaust by a not famous actor. If I were, some big star somewhere, then I suppose maybe somebody would want to publish it. I'm more interested in getting my play on. I think if the play has any kind of notoriety, I might be able to find a publisher. Maybe I'm wrong about all of that. But I now give copies of the new edition of the book to friends if they want to read it. It's
Oh,
fine
so
with
you
me.
had it self-published by yourself just to see?
No, it's not self-published. It's just a Microsoft Word document.
Oh, you just email it to them.
Some
All
of it.
right. Well, I want to thank you for being on the CJN Daily.
Thank you.